We continue our very special conversation with a very special young lady. She's Amber Athey. She's the host of the Unfit To Print podcast and radio show, by the way. Are you enjoying that?
I'm loving it. Yeah, it's over at WCBM on Sunday nights.
In the mighty Baltimore, Maryland, although honestly, it's the internet. You can pick it up anywhere, right?
Yeah, you can watch on WCBM.com every week, and I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's very fun. Well, you're very good. You're a great broadcaster.
Thank you.
That's why you're here, for crying out loud. But by the way, Unfit To Print, you're talking about a lot of stories and a lot of topics every week that's going on in the news, but are you also trying your best to find those stories that are sort of off the path and the things that you're not supposed to touch?
Of course. Yeah. I'm always trying to stir up controversy. You know me.
Yeah, I am aware of some of your controversies that you like to stir up.
I figure I'm already canceled at this point. I can at least use that as an opportunity to say the things that other people can't.
It's liberating. Look at you. All right. Well, let's talk about the fallout from the midterm elections. Listen, you know me, I'm a positive guy. I always try to find the upside. And I was like, listen, as long as we control the committees in the House, whether we get a 30-seat majority or a 3-seat majority, the most important thing is doing our own investigations and wrestling those committees back. That said, a lot of people are disappointed. They think we should have done better, the Republicans should have done better. So what's the fallout? I mean, obviously there's a fight over the chairmanship of the RNC right now. How do you see that shaking down?
Unfortunately, I think that Ronna will win re-election. According to some of the numbers I've been crunching, she has had the number of board members available to vote for her that she needs since basically the day after the midterms. Mm-hmm. So that's a shame because it's pretty incredible that she's overseen 3 losing election cycles and somehow still gets to keep her job. Her fundraising numbers have fallen. And ahead of the midterms, the RNC basically was worthless. They had, I hate to say it, but it's true. They had their employees mostly concentrated in deep red areas where Republicans were set to sweep and had fewer employees in some of the swing states and swing districts.
Yeah, that's kind of counterintuitive, let's say.
And in addition to that, they had this plan that they threw out in the 11th hour, basically 2 weeks before the election, to start targeting what they refer to as delinquent voters. Now, if you've never heard of that term, I hadn't either, and I couldn't find it used in any other political space. They basically made this up. But what it refers to is someone who voted by a certain time period in the previous election. If they hadn't voted by that time period this time, the RNC would make an effort to reach out to them and remind them to go vote. So, for example, if someone had voted early in 2020, then they hadn't voted early yet in 2022, the RNC would say, hey, make sure you go out and vote. But the obvious difference is in 2020, we were in the midst of the pandemic. And in 2022, people are comfortable going to the polls again. So they wasted all of their money trying to get people who were probably going to vote anyway, or 99% going to vote anyway, instead of trying to turn out independents and swing voters.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And why invent something new there? Why not? Well, I hate to say it, but why not do what the Democrats have perfected, right? Which is really hammer that early voting for all voters, not just the ones that happened to do it last time around, and even ballot harvest where it's legal in places like California and other places. I mean, listen, I think you're like me. I don't like all of these rules that Democrats have insisted on with ballot harvesting and mail-in voting and early voting. We should have an election day, but as long as it's the law, we should play that game. Right? Shouldn't we? Should we go out there and do the early voting? Why haven't we?
Absolutely, we should. It's a huge mistake not to, especially when you look at the motivation of voters, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're going into election day and you already see that the Democrats are up however many votes or what percentage of the votes, that discourages your people from going out to vote on election day.
That's right.
Not to mention there's always election day shenanigans.
Right.
I know people say, oh, the voter fraud narrative is bogus, and Trump talks about it too much. I agree. But the Maricopa County stuff
it happened.
with
That's
Carrie
right.
Lake's election and Blake Masters was weird.
Exactly.
And you eliminate that from the conversation when you allow people to vote early and then give them time to cure their ballots.
That's right. Knowing that happens on election day every year, it's weird. It's like Republican candidates will go out there and say, oh, something always seems to happen on election day, and also don't worry about that early voting because our voters come out on election day. It's like, wait a minute, if you know something's going to happen, why not tell your voters to come out early?
They're shooting themselves in the foot repeatedly, and somehow they don't see it. understand how they're so stuck on the idea of being opposed to these laws that they don't use them when they benefit them.
Well,
that's like
here
not
it is.
that's like not taking a tax exemption from the IRS.
Exactly. You may have fought that tax exemption and you thought it was a bad idea, but if it becomes law, if it's the law, you take it. You're absolutely right. But for some reason, Republicans are always, well, I'm standing on my principles. I'm not going to play that game because my principles, it may be the law and it may be legal, but I have a more pristine. Okay, fine, then you're going to lose.
Yeah, that's sort of the bulwark and dispatch disposition, isn't it?
That's right.
I'll stand on my principles as, my opponent puts his boot on my face and destroys me and my family.
Well, and of course, as we've discussed, those principles are now in a place where if you're David French, you're advocating for not just Drag Queen Story Hour, but I saw him recently write in favor of, what the FBI did there with Twitter, not really as bad as you think.
Oh,
but
thanks, David.
We'll get into that a little bit later. Let's set aside the chairmanship of the RNC. By the way, here's the irony. If Ronna McDaniel does win the chairmanship of the RNC, and I think that you're right, it's sort of baked in the cake, it actually reinforces the feeling and opinion and suspicion that it's the establishment who always wins. It's because of the nature of how you choose your RNC chairwoman. So she's not, even if she wins, she's reinforcing the suspicion about how things are done in this town.
And I would just say as well that to the people who say, DeSantis is the establishment pick and Trump is still the outsider, Trump has supported Ronna McDaniel, Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah.
So he is directly supporting these people because they're personally loyal to him, but they haven't actually helped the party.
All right, we're going to get into the Trump, DeSantis, and whoever else might be running for president in our next segment. But let's talk about Kevin McCarthy. He's the heir apparent, of course, and we Republicans always give it to the next guy in line. But he doesn't yet have the votes that he needs to win it. Is there some stuff going on still that might actually keep him from getting the gavel, do you think? Or do you think Trump has now officially said, yeah, I think we should give it to McCarthy?
Well, Andy Biggs claims that he's going to take the speakership from McCarthy. I don't really see that happening.
Neither do we. We had him on a couple weeks ago. I like the guy,
I
but
know.
I kept saying, but do you have the votes? He goes, oh, it's not about the votes. No, it actually is about
the
the votes.
And I just think that typically what happens in these types of conversations is that there will be a lot of backroom deals made in terms of who gets to sit on what committees and who the chairman will be. And ultimately, Kevin McCarthy is a good enough strategy-based politician. Basically, that's all he is. He doesn't really have much in the way of ideology. He's just a tactician, sort of akin to Mitch McConnell, and I think he's going to pull it out.
Yeah. And he's going to have a narrow majority, though. So it's interesting. It's like he's going to get the gavel, and I know that that's a big deal to be Speaker of the House, but it's not like it's going to be a very easy job for him for the next 2 years.
No, it's going to be difficult. I mean, he has to unite those two factions of the party that are currently opposing him. But I don't know.
With a very, very slim room for error.
I hate to say this, but maybe he could look to Nancy Pelosi's speakership as an example.
You shouldn't hate to say it. If there's one thing she was good at, I didn't like what she used her evil powers for, but she certainly was effective in keeping her caucus together.
Yeah, I mean, she kept the squad in line. She had AOC flipping on a lot of her campaign promises to vote with the Democrats, and I think it ended up with only a couple of the squad members really being a thorn in her side.
She had one real benefit on her side there, which is nobody ever holds Democrats accountable for being hypocritical,
right,
for taking two sides. For who's going to tell AOC that she's a hypocrite for going back on her promises for voting for Nancy Pelosi? Certainly no one in the media.
And Democrats have no shame anyway, so even if you do call them hypocrite, they don't care.
Well, she also had another thing going for her, and that is we've seen this for the last 6 years. They've been able to demonize Donald Trump. So it's like, okay, if you're not with me, that means you're helping the people who are on Trump's side. And I don't know, listen, I think Biden's a terrible human being. I always have. I mean, you think he's an affable old guy. Ask Robert Bork's family how affable he is. Ask all of the families of aborted babies, that he's empowered over his entire career, and still tried to say that he's a Catholic. But I don't think if he engenders the same kind of passion that Trump engenders on the left.
No, I don't think so. I think everyone is sort of reluctantly behind him on the left. And then on the right, he's just not a great villain, I guess you could say.
We laugh at him too much, I think.
We do.
We laugh at him, and it makes him sort of a clownish sort of figure.
Yeah, because if you talk about him as if he's not responsible for anything, then you kind of take the bite away from your criticisms because he's not responsible for any of the bad stuff that's happening.
This leads us to presidential politics, and we're going to talk about it because next year is going to be a big year setting up the presidential election in 24. So keep it here. More with Amber Athey on O'Connor Tonight.